most of us grow up with what I would call Hollywood expectations of reality. You know, when we're kids, we soon learn fairly quickly that the world doesn't necessarily bend itself to every whim that we have. So we can't always get an ice cream when we want one. We can't always have comfort when we want it. So, maybe we scream a bit when we're kids, but sooner or later we learn that the world isn't there just for us. Well, as we get older, then our minds are filled with Hollywood expectations that life has a meaning, you have a purpose. After all, in Hollywood movies, people, the hero, always seems to fulfill some great purpose. So we grow up expecting that our life will have meaning and purpose. We expect that there is justice in the world because the bad guy typically gets caught. We think that there is an objective morality. In Hollywood movies, well, all movies, there's usually a moral tale involved. And we think there's such a thing as truth. Some great statement in the movie about how things should be. And so there's another growing up that can take place. With a lot of people it doesn't. They have their minds full of all these Hollywood expectations, and because the world doesn't work in the way that Hollywood works, they become resentful and maybe a little bit bitter, unhappy. And they typically start complaining. So we might start using words like it's all futile, it's empty, it's meaningless, it's a shit show. Because the world isn't matching up to our expectations. So, you expect the crooks at the top of society to get caught and punished. And guess what? They don't. They're in positions of power. They can afford good lawyers and they can afford to influence people that might bend things their way. We expect that our life has a meaning, that somewhere in our life, or at some point in our life, someone will give us some external validation and say, the meaning of your life is, whatever it is. And of course, we always want something grand and magnificent. So the meaning of your life is to help change the world. Of course, people who want to change the world are typically people who want everyone to be like them. So wanting to change the world isn't such a great thing, typically anyway. But this is the kind of ego trips we go on. And in the New Age thing, you'll meet a lot of people say, "Oh, the purpose of my life is to bring love and light to other people." Maybe other people don't want your fucking love and light. Maybe they're kind of okay as they are. So anyway, our Hollywood version of reality kind of bumps up against real reality, and we start to feel kind of disappointed that the whole thing isn't panning out as our really egotistical little ideas would have it pan out. So there is no great truth. There is no objective morality. It doesn't mean that we're total bastards. It just means that if you go looking for some kind of external morality, then depending on where you live, because in some countries it's considered okay to mutilate the genitals of little girls, and in other countries it's considered okay to mutilate the genitals of little boys. Whether you think that's okay or not will probably depend on where you live. And there are other things as well. So we grow up with all these expectations. And we go either one of two ways once we've gone down that track. We either just say, well, life isn't conforming to my expectations, that my life has some grand meaning, some purpose, that there's justice in the world, that there's a moral code that is objective, that there's some grand truth out there, and so on. And we see that actually it doesn't all work like that, so we get pissed off and we say, well, it's all a shit show, it's futile. Just because. It's like we're little babies spitting the comforter out, or taking the ball home. Well, if it's not going to work the way I want it to, then I'm going to take the ball home. Well, we need to grow up a little bit. So here's the kind of solution to this. Actually, I was going to do this for Patreon, but I guess it has a broad appeal, so I'll plaster it on YouTube. So here's the kind of solution. We need to grow up. What do I mean by grow up? Well, firstly, we need to stop looking for external validation. We desperately want someone to tell us what the meaning or purpose of our life is. Create your own fucking meaning or purpose. What's to stop you doing that? Then you say, well, I've just made it up and blah blah blah. Well, yeah, you've made it up. Create your own life. Because if you don't create it, then other people are going to create it for you. Work 9 to 5 for 40 years or 50 years. Have 2.2 kids. Take on a mortgage. All the stuff all the values that are pushed onto us. If you don't create your own set of values, your own purpose, your own meaning, then all that will happen is you will suck in the meaning and purposes that are prevalent in society. And they may not suit you all that well. And what's more, if you've got more than 2 brain cells firing, you might start thinking, well, is there any more than this? Because this isn't really satisfying. So, let's grow up. Create your own purpose or meaning in life. Or maybe you don't need that. Maybe you just live from moment to moment, which is, I have to admit, pretty much how I live. I don't need any grand scheme for my life. My own view towards myself is that I'm a process. I was born X years ago, not telling you how many. I was born X years ago, and looking back on it, a kind of process has unfolded. I'm not a thing, I'm a process, and one day, in terms of time and space anyway, the process will come to an end. In terms of moral codes, have your own moral code if you need one. If you need to be restricted by some kind of behavioral code, then invent one. I mean, most of us don't need that. Most of us have some kind of notion of how we should behave. We don't need some person to tell us, well, and of course religious and spiritual people are the worst at this kind of thing. Here's how you should live, and here's how you shouldn't live. Live however the fuck you want. The obvious thing to do is not to run foul of the law. But, as Spinoza says, basically nature has no problem with deceit, anger, cunning, all those kind of things. Why not? Well, because it allows it. You can't walk through a wall, so nature doesn't allow that. But if you want to deceive somebody, you can do it. And this is why we have laws, and why we have a society, because our natural inclination would be to lie and cheat, and to steal, and maybe physical violence. So there are laws against that kind of thing, to constrain our activity. if you want an objective moral code, then I'm afraid you'll look forever. You won't find one. You'll find plenty of people laying down rules for how you should behave. And what will happen is, if you ingest those, then you'll find situations where maybe that moral code isn't such a good idea, or where you cannot live up to the moral code and you'll start getting neurotic and maybe unhappy. So, if you want to tie yourself down with some rules, then do it. Create your own moral code. But there is no objective moral code. No set of rules by which you can live your life. People have had a go at it. Kant had a go at it, but personally I don't go with Kant's view on that, but maybe you would, although it's difficult stuff. In reality, as far as that's concerned, Spinoza had a really, really good idea. He said, well, what is good is what is good for you in terms of your own aims and ambitions and the purpose and the meaning you've assigned to your life. What is good is whatever helps you achieve those things. And what is bad is whatever stops you achieving those things. There you go, good and bad. It's relative to you, it's not absolute. Everybody will have their own ideas of what is good and bad. And generally speaking, the clashes between one set of ideas around what is good and bad and somebody else's ideas are generally sorted out by the way society and the law is structured. So, just to recap on that, if you go into life as an adult thinking that there's some pre-assigned meaning, there's some pre-assigned purpose, there are pre-assigned moral codes, there is justice, that your life will be pleasant. We watch these Hollywood movies, people seem to, very often anyway, live pleasant lives and it all turns out nice. It's fairy tales. Life may not be pleasant. So we expect our life to be pleasant, meaning and all the rest of it, and the truth and objective morality. And when that doesn't happen, we start spitting the dummy out or the comforter out. Well, it's all futile, it's all empty, it's meaningless, it's a shit show. Of course, if everything was going your way, in terms of your own little Hollywood version of reality, then you probably wouldn't be saying those things. And so we grow up and we say, well, okay, if I want a purpose, then I'll create one. If I want meaning, I'll create it. If I want moral code, I'll create it. If I want to know what good and bad is, well, what is good is what's good for me, and what is bad is what's bad for me. And of course, you're going to have people saying, oh, that's so selfish. There's nothing selfish about it at all. All you're doing is creating a life for yourself that has some, hopefully, fullness in it for you. Makes you feel like it's worth living. Of course, there are always people who will say, well, you're selfish and you should do something else. Of course, those are the people being selfish. You're not telling them how to live their life. So, we grow up and we don't look to the world for external validation for any of our values, our purposes and all that kind of stuff. So we become adults. The problem is that in life, and particularly with spiritual folk and what have you, they never grow up.